and today we're going to be talking about migrating and upgrading with Gradle. I'm Szczepan Faber. I'm a core developer at Gradle. You also might know me from my work at Mockito Library, which is a pretty awesome mocking framework for Java. And I live in Krakow in Poland. It's a lovely place. Please come visit one day. All right, migrating and upgrading with Gradle. So this is the content of today's talk. We will probably stretch a little bit more than 1 hour, but let's hope for the best. So I'll cover the migration best practices, which will be mostly theoretical. Then I'll go for the demos for migrating from Maven, and the demos will demonstrate how adaptable and flexible Gradle is and how it can influence the ease of migration. And basically, it allows you the incremental migration, which is what I'll cover here. Also, I'm going to cover end. And at the end, there will be upgrading Gradle, which is moving from an older version of Gradle to a newer Gradle of Gradle. So best practices. So first thing is the decision to migrate. I'm assuming that since you joined this webinar, most of you are pretty sure that migrating to Gradle is a pretty good idea. If you need some interesting arguments in favor for Gradle, for example, to convince one of your teammates, take a look at the Hibernate story, which explains why the Hibernate team, a very respected team in the open source space, very well known, moved to Gradle. Obviously, preparing the team is also important. So everything you can do to make sure that the team is prepared, like trainings, you can watch our webinars when they are offline. You can grab some help from other teams that have already migrated to Gradle, etc. Also, take a look at our forums if you need help. Okay, another thing is that every time you migrate, upgrade, or even refactor your build, there are ways to validate if the build behaves the same. And there are various tools for build output comparison. Even the diff tool, the Linux standard tool, can be helpful to find out whether, for example, the folders have the same content, the jars have the same content. So there are tools out there, and there might be of help when you migrate your build. Gradle itself will soon ship with a built-in migration plugin that will streamline the migration. I'm gonna have a short demo of that at the end of this talk. Suffice to say that we want to make the migration as easy as possible. So basically, you're going to tell Gradle, this is the Gradle version I want to use. Tell me if it's okay to migrate, and Gradle will tell you, yes, it's okay. You're going to have those benefits. You have to change this because we deprecated, let's say, some property. So everything will tell you, and all the currently manual work that you normally do when you validate your build, it's going to be automated via this migration plugin feature. Okay, so one other thing I want to mention is the Gradle wrapper. I'm not gonna talk in details about Gradle wrapper. Take a look at the screencast that is available on the Gradleware pages. Basically, the Gradle wrapper will help with the migration to Gradle because it makes the installation of Gradle easy, as your CI tools and team members don't have to install the correct version of Gradle, because Gradle wrapper will make sure they use the correct Gradle version. It will make sure that the consistent Gradle version is used in your team. The builds are reproducible that way. So all the benefits of Gradle wrapper will help you in migrating. So I'm moving on. If you have any questions, feel free to use the question tab in the webinar tools. Incremental and background migration. So because Gradle is so configurable and flexible, it allows you to migrate iteratively. So for example, in the first stage, you can only reproduce the build outputs, okay? And then in the next iteration, you can, the goal in your team might be that the test output is the same. So all the tests that run in the old build, they pass, and they should pass in the same fashion in the new build using Gradle. And then the next step might be moving away from manually managed dependencies that are checked into the VCS and move to the declarative dependencies that are configured in your build scripts, and during the build time, they are downloaded from remote repositories. So that's the premise of Gradle. We want to help you with the incremental migration. Also, since Gradle can be adopted to whatever custom requirements you have, whatever layout or topology of your project is, you can start developing the new build without changing your existing topology or layouts, right? Sources can leave when they are. The build outputs can be generated to where it was, right? This doesn't change. This means that migration is easier because you don't interfere with the regular work of your team, all right? It's not that you are moving to Gradle, now you have to change all that stuff in your build, in your project. Not necessarily. You can incrementally migrate, keeping the old build going for some time and develop incrementally the new features. And an interesting client story I have for you is one of our clients for one release cycle kept the old build running with the new build. Okay, the new build was obviously in Gradle, and they put some QA effort to make sure that the application that is built with the new infrastructure, new automation behaves the same, that the outputs of the builds are the same. So this is how what they did, and in the next release cycle, basically they completely removed the old build tool. They also asked us to review their build scripts so we could help in improving their existing Gradle infrastructure even better. All those features like incremental migration and the fact that you can do it in background without interfering with the existing logic and existing automation means that you can plan the migration and you can execute it well. You can adapt your plan during the execution, and you can apply the regular agile methods you use for your development to migration of your automation into Gradle. Okay, I'm moving on. If you have questions, feel free to ask. Okay, so migrating from Maven. So first thing I want to demo is Maven conversion utility that basically takes your existing Maven build, be it multi-module build or a single module build, and generates the build.gradle files for that build so that it can be used with Gradle. Before I jump into demoing that, I want to show you where it actually originates from. So this feature is currently experimental and hasn't been yet released. So it's going to be a part of Gradle 1.2. Before 1.2, for example, if you want, after this webinar, migrate some projects to, for example, for testing purposes, you should use the Gradle nightly build. And if you want to find out how to use this Maven conversion utility, you can go to the user guide, and then there's a new chapter that is called Experimental Bootstrap plugin. So down the road, what we want to have is we want to have some kind of a Bootstrap plugin. So basically, let's say you have an existing Maven project, you create a small builder Gradle file there. That's an example how it can be used. It might change, and you apply this Bootstrap plugin, and basically what it does, it bootstrap the Gradle environment fully working with your existing project. At the moment, our Bootstrap facility only converts the Maven projects, and it is based on the Maven to Gradle tool that has been available for a while. It was available in the GitHub repository. It's fully open source. It has been created by a couple of prominent contributors in the open source space. The original founder being Baruch. Uh, right. So let's actually demo the Bootstrap plugin. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go to Maven conversion. Now what I'm going to do is this folder contains a Maven project. As you can see, there's a POM XML here, and there are some subfolders. So let's do Maven clean. Let's do, for example, Maven clean build. Sorry, build won't work. I'm not in the Gradle space anymore. Let's go for install. I want to show you basically that this build is fully working right now, and we will see the reactor summary that will demonstrate what is the layout of this project. So we have some kind of a parent, and we have three sub projects, three modules. One is the API, the other is the implementation, and another one is a webinar web application. Right, so it's working right now, but this is a Maven project. It has nothing to do with Gradle. So let's use this new feature to convert that to Gradle. So I'm gonna create a build.gradle file, the Gradle file here. And for now, what it's going to do, it's going to apply plugin Maven to Gradle. Now, I want to make sure you see that I'm using the nightly build of Gradle. So you see it's 1.2 and some snapshot version. So after the conversion is done, you can pretty much use other versions of Gradle, for example, 1.0 or 1.2. However, for this purpose of the conversion, you need to use the nightly build because this one contains this new plugin that is just being developed. So I'm going to do Gradle tasks to show you what is the new task that has been introduced by the plugin. Oh, I'm sorry about that. I need to run with -u because I don't want to search upwards because I have some other projects open. I don't want Gradle to pick them up. Basically, there's Maven to Gradle task. Okay, so I want to run this task. Gradle -u. Don't worry about this -u. It's just because I'm not in the best folder that I could run this demo. I should move that demo project elsewhere. I forgot about that. Sorry about that. Okay, now what I'm going to do is show you what has happened. So let's ls and see what is available now. Now what you can see, there's a build.gradle file that has been created. There's a settings.gradle file that has been created. Let's quickly cat the settings.gradle to see what's there. As you can see that it contains the configurations of the projects. We can also do Gradle projects to see that this is now a Gradle project, and it has picked up all those projects, which means the API, the implementation, and the WAR. I'm going to build it in a second. Before doing that, I want to quickly discuss other files that has been created to explain how this plugin works. So at the moment, the plugin has been directly ported from the open source space. So it works by running the maven command that is available on your path. So basically we generate effective POM and effective settings, and then we parse the effective POM and settings in order to generate the Gradle structure and the Gradle build scripts. So in the future, this will be much better. We will change that. As I mentioned earlier, I don't claim this tool is perfect. It's gonna get better very soon as we will put more work into it. For now, mostly it ports the functionality that was existing in the Maven to Gradle tool from the open source. Okay, so let's actually run it. I can do Gradle clean build now. This should build fine. Now what I'm gonna do is the Maven project actually had a Jetty plugin installed. So I'm going to do Jetty run in order to run Jetty to show you that oops, can't find the Jetty. Oops, it should have been configured. Sorry about that. I'm going to skip demoing the Jetty plugin. I'm sure you believe that the Jetty plugin works in Maven. Instead, I'm going to go to the webinar war, the build.gradle file that has been created for the webinar war submodule. As you can see, it applies the war plugin. It configures the necessary dependencies. Those dependencies are inferred from the effective POM. Apparently, the Maven project had there was a dependency from the web application to the implementation application. I'm going to apply Jetty plugin here. And then I'm going to do Gradle Jetty run. to show you that the Jetty should work fine. Now I'm gonna click through that URL, stealing it from here, and it says the webinar says I'm happy today. I'm gonna later on I will discuss how it works and the class that generates that. Suffice to say for now that right now what I have here is that I can run two builds in parallel. I can run the Gradle build, I can run the Maven build. They all are functioning with the same layout, with the same sources. All right, that could be some kind of a stepping stone in your migration. Um, Definitely, I recommend to try out this migration and conversion utility. It will get much better. This will be a general purpose Bootstrap plugin that will be able to bootstrap Gradle project out of different projects, not only Maven project. Um, it is useful for now. For example, even if the dependencies that you can transfer from the POM XML into your builder Gradle, it makes it nice that the tool does it for you. You don't have to type those dependencies from your POM to the builder Gradle. I will make the sources of those demos available after this webinar, and this webinar will be also available online a few days after today. Okay, let's move on to the to our presentation. So let me talk a little bit about incremental migration and the shallow and the deep import in the Maven space. So before I discuss the shallow and deep import, I'll start demoing how you could go about migrating from Gradle in an incremental fashion in a heterogeneous project that might be a multi-module Gradle build that contains one module that is built by Maven. Okay, so it's gonna get clear in a second. Bear with me. So I'm gonna go back. I'm gonna go to heterogeneous with Maven. So this build should be more or less working, but I'm gonna make a few amendments. So first of all, let's see what are the projects here. So Gradle projects. Come on. Okay, cool. So we do have three projects. Again, it's going to have a similar structure to our previous demo, which was a completely Maven project, and we converted it to the complete Gradle project. In this particular case, what's going to happen is that the webinar implementation project will be Maven project and will be always built by Maven. And by demoing that, what I'd like to convey is that Gradle is adaptable and you can have parts of your automation using the old automation like the legacy build tools or other build tools. So for example, some of your sub projects might be less interesting, might be in maintenance mode, no code is written for them, which might mean that there is no big benefit in migrating them to Gradle. So there might be other requirements that require this sub project to be built by Maven. So let me show you how this could work in Gradle. And I'm hoping that it will prove how adaptable and flexible Gradle is. So this is not quite yet working. So the webinar, so let's do Gradle tasks. First, okay, there are some problems here, but I will get there soon. So first of all, I'm gonna show you some of the build.gradle files. So the first build.gradle, it contains the solution already. It shouldn't. So let's discuss a little bit what's going to happen here. So this is the root build.gradle file for this multi-project Gradle build. I configured here the webinar API project that basically is a Java project that contains one interface. I do also configure the webinar war project, which is a web application that is using those interfaces. And it's also using one more thing. It's using the implementation project. However, I don't have yet declared the dependency. I'll do it in a second. I also configure for all project the group and the version. Okay. I would like to do Gradle tasks now. I think this should work. Thank you very much. I do have a Jetty plugin installed for Webinar War. Let's run it. Let's see what our web application does. Gradle Jetty run. Okay, thank you very much. Let's go back here. Now this will break, but it's a problem processing the webinar. It can't find the webinar class. There's a compilation problem. Let's go back to the webinar. Or let's go to sources, main, web app, and the JSP file that is generating that. The JSP file imports the webinar package and uses the webinar class. This class is unavailable. This class is a part of the implementation project. Let me prove that. So if I go to ls webinar impl, C, main Java webinar. As you can see, there's a webinar Java. Let's actually quickly see this class. It lives in the webinar implementation project. It only has a get description method and just print something. The problem being this project is not yet built because we want it to be built with Maven for some reason. So let's actually, for now, let's cd into the implementation project. Let's take a look at the builder Gradle file that is there. There's nothing yet here. There's a description that says there's a webinar implementation here. It contains the webinar class. This class is needed by our war application in the JSP file. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to prove you that the Maven is working fine because I do have a POM XML here, and this is a proper Maven project that can build this webinar Java class. So if I can do Maven clean package, as you can see, it builds things. We see Surefire report from Maven. We see build success. And if I ls the target folder, it creates the webinar impl. To prove that it's working, let's do Maven clean. Let's ls the target again. Okay, a target does not exist, obviously, because I've cleaned it. So let's now do Maven package. It should compile the class and create the jar. If I ls target again, it's there. So this is a properly functional Maven project. Let's make it a proper part of our Gradle project. Okay, so for that, I will simply call out to Maven command line and just build it, treating the Maven build as a black box. I'll issue a Maven command and I'll assume that it'll work. To know how to do that, you can quickly go to the documentation for a Gradle exec task that we will use. First answer on the Google is usually a good one. So this is an example that task that stops the Tomcat. I'm going to mimic it now in here. So I'm going to create a task. I'm going to call it Maven build. It's not a best name, but I think it's going to be good for this demo. It's going to be of type exec. It's going to have a command line that says Maven clean package. That'll do for now. Let's get back to the terminal. Let's do Gradle tasks now. Actually, one more thing I want to do. Let's add a description to this task. Description creates the jar using Maven. Okay, let's run the Gradle tasks again. As you can see, we have a Maven build task. Let's run it. Let's see if Gradle can run it. As you can see, we see the same output as we see when we run Maven. So Gradle now treats this Maven build as a black box. We just exec out and just build it. That's not probably all. We might want to have a clean task, for example, task clean type. This time I'm gonna not delegate to Maven. It's gonna be of type delete, and it's going to delete the target. So now I can also do Gradle clean in here, which will clean the target folder. and then I can do Gradle maven build, which also does clean, but doesn't matter. I just want to, this is just an example. So this is one way. Now, this is not it. The problem that we have, that we built the jar. That's great that we built this jar. However, this jar, this webinar implementation jar, is not a dependency to our war yet, right? Our war will not include that. So I'm going to jump to the root folder. Now I'm going to do Gradle clean build. It builds all the things, and I want to show you that if I show you the content of the war file, build libs, it only contains the webinar API. It does not contain the impl jar, which means that our our JSP pages won't work, still won't work. Okay. Let's fix that problem. The way to do it in Gradle is we need to declare a configuration, and then we want to declare an artifact that will be hooked to that configuration, and then other projects in the builder, in the Gradle multi-project build, can depend on it. So don't worry if it's not obvious. It's going to be in a second, I'm hoping. Configurations. I'm going to create an archives configuration, which is similar to what is introduced by the Java plugin if we have used, and an artifact. And then I need to declare an artifact. So it's going to be attached to the archives configuration. It's going to be a file. For now, I'll just use the file that has been created. Okay, build. So hang on, I need to build it again. So let's do Gradle maven build. I'm gonna just, okay, because I haven't yet, it's not yet working. Okay, I'll type it from my head. So the file, it's gonna live in target. I'm gonna remove this hard-coded string soon. For now, let's stay with that. So it's going, the artifact that we will declare will be target webinar impl version 1.0 snapshot jar, and it's going to be built by the maven build. So we declare what is the task that makes it happen, this file that makes this file basically exist where we expect it to be. Once we have that, I'm going to quickly jump to the root build.gradle, and I want to declare this dependency on my webinar war. Okay. Now since I'm using the JSP, I can safely do runtime project. I'm going to use a slightly different syntax. So path is going to be webinar impl configuration archives. The reason I need to use the slightly different syntax for declaring this dependency is that basically I need to declare explicitly which is the configuration. If I have used the regular Gradle plugins like the Java plugin, that wouldn't be necessary, and I could do just that. But in this particular case, we have a pretty exotic case, which means I need to declare it explicitly. Okay, now I think we are close to that. So let's do one quick thing. I'm going to do Gradle build with -m, which means a dry run. This means that I won't run the Gradle build from my root project. It'll just show me what is the sequence of tasks that get executed. And what I'm expecting here is before the webinar work gets executed, we see that the webinar impl is being built and the maven build has been run, which means that the jar is there. Now, I want to check one more thing. I want to take a look. Oh, hang on, I need to run it actually. So let's do Gradle clean build. Excellent. And let's unzip the war file. As you can see, the war file now contains the implementation jar. Okay, now let's do Gradle jetty run, And I'm hoping that the JSP will correctly know the webinar class, which means that our demo should just work. If it doesn't, then I'm in trouble. I'm very happy since yesterday. So this is what the webinar says. Let's refactor it a little bit to make it a little bit nicer, and I'll demonstrate it again soon. So let's get back to, hang on, I want to close this one. I'm going to close that one too. I went back to my webinar implementation. There are a few things I don't like here. For example, I don't like the fact that this file, it's just from somewhere here. I would like it to be a part of the maven build task. So again, I'm using the extensibility of Gradle to declare that I want the output jar property of the maven build task. So the maven build task will declare output jar property, which will contain the file target webinar ample 1.0 snapshot jar. Now it's much better, it's much more self-contained because this information is coupled with the task that is creating it. So it's nicely, we keep nicely the encapsulation. One other thing I could do, I could obviously get rid of some of the strings hard-coded here and do things like project name, for example, and version, project version. It's going to be a jar. So I think this should still work fine. To prove that, I'm going to do Gradle clean build to run it. And after running that, I'll skip running the Jetty. I'll just unzip the list you the contents of the war. As you can see, it contains the implementation, so everything is correct. So this is what I would call a shallow import of the Maven build, where we basically shell out to whatever build is used. And the reason I wanted to demonstrate it in this migration webinar is because it enables incremental migration, where some parts of your builds which are automated in some custom build tool or some maven build or some end build, they can be wrapped easily with Gradle and they can participate in the Gradle ecosystem. To prove it even more, let's spice up this example a little bit. So right now, by the way, you feel free to ask questions because I'm getting nervous that this is completely unclear. Okay, so let's take a look here. There's also, remember the webinar API project, which currently is pretty much only used by the webinar war. Let's spice up a little bit this example and let's make the webinar implementation actually depend on the webinar API. So how to do that? First, I want to show you what lives under the webinar API. This is C main Java webinar. There's a demoable interface. Let's take a look at this interface. It just contains a method getDescription. Okay, let's get back to our webinar class that is a part of the webinar implementation, and let's make it implementing this interface. So now this is really interesting and completely exotic. We have one part of our multi-project Gradle build is built by a different build tool than Gradle, and it depends on the Gradle project that is built as a part of this multi-project build. So it's getting very interesting. And it should show you nice configurability features for Gradle. Now, this should not work right now because we don't have the dependencies yet laid out correctly. So for example, if I do Gradle maven build, I'm pretty sure it's going to fail on compilation and cannot find symbol demoable. So let's fix that problem. Since the webinar implementation project is built with Maven, I'm going to have to declare dependency in maven pom. So it's the group ID, I believe, is org Gradle webinar. Yes. And the artifact is webinar API. The version is 1.0 snapshot. I'm going to get rid of the scope because I need the default one. This, to be sure that this is working well, I'm going to remove all the org Gradle webinar stuff from my local maven cache. So remove fr from m2 repository org Gradle webinar. Let's remove all from the webinar. Let's run Gradle maven build again. We should see a different problem. Could not find this artifact, so this artifact cannot be found. And the reason being, we haven't yet declared the dependencies right, because maven build requires the webinar API project to be built first. So let's take a look at the webinar implementation build.gradle file. I need to declare a dependency, so the maven build depends on webinar API, and the task we depend on is install. The reason being the webinar API, hang on, let me demonstrate that actually. So the webinar API applies the Maven plugin, which means it adds some Maven capabilities and interesting Maven tasks to the webinar API. For example, the webinar API project now can be installed to the local Maven repository. So if I do Gradle webinar API tasks, it should say install. So there's an install task available on the Gradle API project. So let's close that. Let's get back to the our dependencies. So now I made sure that when Maven build works, the webinar API has been run first. Let's run Gradle Maven build. It's as you can see, the installation has happened here. Webinar API has run, and the build is now successful. And this also applies to our Jerry run. If I run the Jerry, it should all nicely work. Yes, it says the same thing. To prove you that we are actually consuming the latest and greatest webinar, let's actually edit the webinar implementation. Author C, main, Java, webinar, webinar Java. I'm very happy today. Now, if I do Gradle Jerry run, after editing that, all the dependencies are right. The Maven build again builds the jar with the new version of the webinar class, and we have updated the content of the web page. So it's all good. So it's all good. So let's get back. This demonstrates you how adaptable Gradle is. That will help in migration as it will adapt to your custom requirements. Okay, let's push that even further. So what I don't like about this Maven build is that it's not incremental. Okay, the problem is that this is a custom task. I haven't declared its inputs and outputs. Gradle does not understand and cannot build it incrementally. And the effect is that if I do Gradle Maven build, it will build the jar. Actually, the clean doesn't help either here, but doesn't matter right now. I'll fix that in a second. So we have a Maven build. When I run it again, it's still successful. For the time being, I'm gonna get rid of the clean here. So we'll just package it. I want to demonstrate you that even if you wrap your custom build tool, be it Maven or other build tool, with Gradle, you can still take advantage of some Gradle features like the incremental builds. So I'm going to declare the inputs and outputs of this task. Take a look at our documentation on the web pages in the DSL reference. There is all about, we mentioned that also in the user guide, how to declare inputs and outputs of the task. So I will not dive that into too many details. So task inputs, and I'm going to declare files. There's a file tree method available in Gradle that you can use, and I'm going to say that file tree also C main Java, because this is where the webinar class lives. And I'm going to declare the outputs file, and it's going to be the same as here, right? The output jar. Okay, let's do Gradle maven build. Again, first time I run it, it's not going to be incremental because Gradle needs to record the outputs and inputs. Next time I'm running it, it's incremental, as you can see. The install is not yet incremental, but let's not worry about that. As you can see, maven build has run. Now, you want to make sure it's working fine, so let me prove you. If I change, I'm very happy since last week. So I've changed the Java class, which is an input of the maven build. As you can see, maven build runs. Another thing you might be interested, so this is how we introduce the incremental features to this custom task that wraps some kind of a custom build. Another interesting aspect is that we can configure the logging to capture standard output at the info level. The reason I do it because I don't like this maven output being all the time when I run my build. Okay, so if I do maven clean, Gradle clean maven build, I don't want to see the maven output. Okay, you just run. But if I run with -I, which means info level, I should see some more Gradle output, but I also see the maven output. Okay, so this is another feature that shows how nicely Gradle can adopt to some kind of a third-party builds or build tools. Okay, no questions yet? Okay, so let's get back to the presentation. So I demonstrated you the shallow import, which means we treated a Maven build as a black box. Deep import is something that we want to have available in future, and it would mean that the Maven goals and tasks and plugin will be first-class citizens of the Gradle space. And before explaining that further, I want to show you how it works in Ant. Okay, so about the incrementally migrating from Ant. I'm going to move folders a bit to demo number 3. What I have here is pretty much the same thing I have for my Maven build, right? So again, I have a webinar API, webinar implementation, and webinar war. Now, the difference is that the webinar implementation is an Ant project, okay? Let's take a look at the root build.gradle file. So it's pretty much the same. As you can see, we also have a runtime dependency from the war using the archives configuration. Let's take a look at the webinar implementation build.gradle file. It has the similar stuff as we've seen before, right? It has an end build and it depends on the webinar API build. It also captures the standard output to info level. So exactly the same thing as I demonstrated before, but for end. And I'm pretty sure this should build. So if I run this, this should build. I can do also Gradle Jerry run, which will show whatever version of the webinar class I have for that particular demo. It says I'm happy since yesterday. Okay, so let me make sure I'm in the right place. I'm in the right spot. So what I would like to demonstrate is going further and actually doing the deep import. Okay, so let's go. I'm going to cd to the webinar implementation, which is our exotic sub project that is built with Ant. This is I'm going to ls it so that you can see that there's a build XML here. So this is a proper Ant project that can be built with Ant. So I can do Ant -p to see the tasks. So for example, there's a build jar task, so I can do Ant build jar. This is fully functioning Ant project. Let's make it deep. Let's make this Ant build deeply imported by the Gradle build. Because right now we're not doing that. We are just executing out to end, which is less robust than what I want to develop right now. So I'm going to comment everything out to make things easier to see. So imagine that we have a blank builder Gradle with just a description. What I'm going to do is import build XML. Okay. Now let's take a look. I'm going to do Gradle tasks. I'm still in the webinar impl directory, so the Gradle tasks is relative to that folder. As you can see, there's a build jar task that got imported from Ant. I can do -- all, which should show me also the clean task and the compile classes. Those are the tasks that came from Ant via this single line of code. Okay. However, that's not enough. We need to lay out the dependencies correct. We need the configurations and artifact. All that needs to work. So let me adopt this code so that it'll use it. So as you can see, there's a build jar task here. So let's create a build. Let's configure the build jar task. So what I'm going to have in the configuration? I'm going to have something similar as here. I'm going to have the output jar like that, because as it happens, the build jar also creates the webinar impl to the target folder. This is what whoever developed this Ant build decided that that's a good idea. He wanted the jar to be in target. Okay, so I want to have the same thing here. I'm gonna keep the dependency here. I'm gonna lose the log level info. I don't need that. I don't need the clean anymore because the clean has been automatically imported. I'm gonna need the configuration still, and I'm gonna need the artifact still. Okay, so this is slightly different. Build jar. This is the way we configure the existing task. Build jar, open closure. This is where we configure it. Okay, let's run it. Okay. Let's go to the folder below and let's do Gradle clean build. Oops. Okay, the problem is I no longer use the end build. Obviously, I forgot to rename the name of the task, which also proves that the end build is not a best name. Okay, as you can see, it builds well. I'm going to skip demoing you the Jet, the application via the GT plugin. Trust me, it will work. More interesting stuff. We can, since we imported that, we have access to the Ant properties. Okay, so if I cat the build.xml file, cat webinar impl build.xml, as you can see, it has a bunch of properties configured, right? One of the properties is a jar file that gets created. I can use it in my Gradle build. So I can, instead of hard coding that here, I can do Ant jar file. That should still work because jar file is a property declared in the build that we have imported. All right. To prove it, clean build. This should still work fine. I can unzip -l the webinar war build libs the war to show you that the jar is still a part of the war application. I want to push that even further. I want to demonstrate it, and I want to demonstrate more features of this way of importing build. I want to make it incremental, and I want to show you how to chain outputs from one task to the inputs of the other task. So the problem I have is that webinar impl, when I do Gradle build jar, it always builds this jar. All right, so it's not incremental. I don't like that because then it makes other parts of Gradle not incremental. If I do Gradle war to build my war, it's not incremental either because all the time the build jar builds the jar. Let's fix that problem. Let's go back to the webinar implementation. One thing I want to show you is that if I do Gradle build jar, and I'm going to again run with the dry run, which means that it shows me the sequence of tasks. As you can see, the webinar impl, there is also a clean, prepare, and compile tasks that have run. Those are the tasks that came from Ant. They are declared in the build XML. If you want to see them, take a look. Here what do I have? Compile classes, clean, and prepare. Okay, so Gradle, when Gradle imported the the build XML, it also configured the necessary task dependencies. Okay, let's first make the compile classes incremental. Okay, so compile classes. Again, I'm going to use the inputs outputs API, files, file tree. Again, the interesting thing I'm going to do is I want to use the properties declared in my build XML. So let's go back to build XML because I want to see. So there's a property source directory and the property source classes directory. I want to use it in my Gradle build. So the inputs are the usrc as the usrc dot their property from end. The outputs are the files usrc classes there. I had it in my clipboard. Okay, so those are the inputs. I think it's pretty much right. Let's compile classes. As you can see, Gradle can infer the camel case execution, so C and uppercase C can Gradle can figure out that this is compile classes. Let's run it again. Whoops, I didn't do it right. Outputs, files, on source there. Oh, okay. Now I know what's the problem. It's because we also depend on the clean task. Because in the ant world, you had to run clean before compilation because the detection mechanism that detected whether the class should be updated or not was not perfect. Not going to jump into details. In order to make it incremental, for the time being, I'm on a disable the clean and prepare task that got imported from ant. So the clean task is disabled, prepare. And this is also interesting because it shows you that I don't have to mess around with my build XML. I don't have to remove those tasks from here. I can disable them here because those tasks became first class citizens of the Gradle ecosystem. Right now I'm going to run it. Yes, compile classes is now up to date. To prove it, let's go to the src main Java webinar Java. If I say since last week, so I'm changing the class and I'm running the Gradle CC, as you can see, it has picked up the change and it's now detected that it needs to be rerun. Similarly, I will declare the inputs and outputs for my build jar task. So the inputs are the files from the compile classes outputs files. So this is how I chain the outputs from one task with the inputs of the other task outputs. And there's one file, which is going to be this file. I'm going to put it to the top. Output file is my ext output jar. I've declared the inputs and outputs for the build jar task, which means that if I do Gradle build jar, it won't be incremental the first time. It should be incremental the next time. If I, for example, remove the target jar, Gradle knows that the output has changed and the build jar task runs. If I again edit the webinar class, I'm happy since last month, let's say, and run the build jar, it should pick up the compile classes has changed, which means that the classes has changed, which are the inputs for the build jar. It's incremental. Now, what's even better, now my entire build is incremental. Okay, if I do Gradle build from the root folder and I run it again, everything is incremental, even though one of my sub projects is built not by Gradle, but by something else. This, in this particular case, is built by Ant. Okay, final test. Gradle Jetty run. Come on, Jetty, don't fail me now, because all is working beautiful. I am happy since last month. Okay, I said earlier that this session will stretch about 5 tops 10 minutes, more than 1 hour. Sorry about that. Okay, cool. Let's close it. Let's get back to the presentation. One small demo I want to do after showing you the deep import is the ant task reuse. And the reason being is that, listen up to the use case, okay? What if your custom build, your existing build depends on some end task? Let's say this is a custom end task developed by your team. Nobody understands how it works. You need to use it, or you depend on some third-party end task that does not have an equivalent in the Gradle space. You know what? Gradle happily solves that use case. So let me go back to the end task reuse. What I have here is builder Gradle file, which already has a solution, which was not my intention, which has a task print checksum that does not do anything yet. So if I do Gradle print checksum, again, I'm using the camel case inferring of what tasks need to run. Whoa, I need -u again so that Gradle does not search upwards in search for the settings to the Gradle file and not treating this as a part of the multi-project build. So the print checksum does not do anything. What I wanted to do is I want to print the checksum of the foo.txt. Okay, so let's take a look at ant checksum task. There you go. I'm gonna just steal one of the example. Okay, I'm gonna just directly paste it here. In the do last section of this task, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the ant builder, which is a regular groovy thing. It's not a part of, it's not a, you can use it outside of Gradle too, but I'm using it here. So I'm gonna run the checksum task with the file foobar, and the property that will store the information about the checksum is foobar md5. In order to make it working, I need to print line the checksum is foobar md5, which is basically this property that is supplied after this checksum task runs. Okay. Whoa, could not find file. Oops, because my file is called foo.txt. Let's call it checksum. Let's run it again. Okay, cool. It prints now the checksum. So as you can see, we easily integrated with a third-party ant task by just using the ant builder. You can definitely use it for completely custom or some exotic ant tasks that your current automation depends on. Okay, guys, no questions? I'm surprised. Okay, let's move on. Migrating incrementally from ant. Upgrading Gradle. So a little bit about the Gradle wrapper. So you will definitely use the Gradle wrapper because it gives you so many benefits that all the teams that use Gradle use the wrapper. And upgrade propagation of the new Gradle version is easy with the Gradle wrapper because the build master can validate if the Gradle version works as it should and the current requirements are met, and it can check in the change in the configuration of the wrapper, and then CIs will pick up this change and it will start using the new version of the Gradle. So it makes it easier. It also makes it easier for the developers in your team. For more information about the wrapper, take a look at the user guide or the screencast that is available. Okay, so the Gradle built-in migration plugin. It is something that is coming. There should be some kind of a experimental version in Gradle 1.2. Basically, the idea is that we really care about the ease of migration. If you want to jump from Gradle 1.4 to 1.5, it should be very easy for you. This plugin will automate all the checks that that can be done. For example, if the build outputs are the same, if the test outputs are the same, if the memory consumption of the build is the same, etc. those are the things that can be automated, and basically this plugin can give you confidence whether you can move to Gradle, or you can move to the next version of Gradle, or you have to change something in your build or upgrade something. So to tease you a little bit with that feature, I want to demonstrate you how it works as of now. I'm gonna have to use the Gradle nightly version for that, which is what I'm doing anyhow. Okay, so I am here. What I have here is a Java Quick Start folder, which contains the Java Quick Start sample that is shipped with every Gradle distribution. So I'm going to copy that into the Java Quick Start v2. Okay, so now what I have here is I have a Java Quick Start, which is one Gradle build, and the Java Quick Start version 2, which is second Gradle build. I'm gonna go to the comparator, and it contains a builder Gradle, which will be a builder Gradle file. It contains there's one task declared here. So this API is experimental. It's only to demonstrate you the current features. It will most likely change. You would probably apply a plugin versus creating a task, but this will be in future. So I've declared where is the source and target version of Gradle, and where is the source project and target project that will be compared. If I do Gradle tasks here in my comparator project, oops, I forgot about -u. Sorry about that. Okay, there's a compare task. So let's do Gradle compare -u. It's using the tooling API behind the scenes to run builds in both folders and basically compare the results. Now, the interesting thing here is that it'll say that so this is all beautiful. It says that again, this is just a experimental console output. It'll get better and show you exactly what are differences. Right now, what it's telling is that there are no differences. So let's make a difference. Let's go to one of the Java Quick Start, to the src main Java person Java, and let's change something in one of the classes. I'm gonna run Gradle compare -u again, and let's see what the console output says. As you can see, the archive entry in one of the jars is different. The size is changed. So this is really very basic functionality, very prototype-ish. Don't hook up to that too much. It's definitely going to change. I just wanted to show you the direction. Basically, what we want to achieve is that you tell Gradle, hey Gradle, I want to migrate to 1.6, and the Gradle will tell you, yeah, you're good to go. There are a few changes, deprecation that you need to fix, but otherwise the build outputs are the same, tests behave the same, all good. So we want to provide you features like that. Okay, so let's get back here. So if you don't have any questions, one more thing I want to mention is about the experimental Bootstrap plugin, and I want to mention a couple of contributors which I should have before, but I'm always afraid that I'm not going to pronounce the Baruch's surname correctly. So again, the experimental Bootstrap plugin has been contributed from the open source. We have ported it, and we will improve it even better, but it comes from the open source, from our contributors, and Baruch Sadogurski as a founder. So I wanted to mention that. Okay. Thank you very much for attending this webinar. I hope to hear you and get you on my next webinar. That's going to be probably Power Feature version 2. Hopefully everything was clear. Feel free to give us feedback. Follow us on Twitter to find out about more training opportunities and webinars like that one. Thanks a lot. See you again soon. Bye-bye.